Imagine, if you will, an ancient map, not etched on parchment, but woven into the very fabric of time, a prophetic tapestry laid out by the hand of God himself. At the heart of this map lies a figure whose words, spoken millennia ago, still echo with astonishing clarity today. His name is Ezekiel. He was a priest, a man thrust into the maelstrom of his nation's despair, chosen to be a conduit for divine truth. His book, often overlooked, is in fact a coded message, a detailed blueprint of the future, revealing the identity and mission of the one we call the Anointed One. What if the most pivotal prophecies about the coming Messiah, the Emmanuel, were not just scattered verses, but a carefully constructed narrative, waiting for you to discover its profound secrets? Get ready, because Ezekiel's journey is about to unfold, and it will challenge everything you thought you knew about prophecy, purpose, and the power of a single, unwavering voice. The year Judah lost its king, Azariah, was a year etched in the collective memory of Jerusalem, not just for the death of a monarch, but for the death of hope itself. A shroud of shadows seemed to cling to the very stones of the city, mirroring the fear that gripped its inhabitants. Young Ezekiel, a priest in waiting, walked these fear-laden streets, his heart heavy. He saw the marketplace, usually vibrant, now a hive of worried whispers and desperate bartering. Idols, once confined to hidden groves, now stood brazenly in public squares, their silent, empty eyes mocking the God of Israel. Injustice, like a creeping vine, choked the life out of the common folk. How long, Lord? Ezekiel often wondered, how long can a nation survive on such hollow ground? A profound sense of impending doom settled over him, a feeling that Jerusalem, his beloved city, was teetering on a precipice. Ezekiel sat in his chamber, the scent of aged scrolls and incense clinging to the air, a quiet sanctuary from the city's growing unrest. He meditated, his spirit restless, sensing a seismic shift in the spiritual currents of Judah. Then the door burst open. Caleb, his loyal friend, stumbled in, face pale, breath ragged. "Ezekiel, it's the Assyrians. They gather on our borders, a storm of iron and fury." Panic vibrated in Caleb's voice. "We must send envoys, forge alliances with Egypt, with any nation willing to stand with us." Caleb's pragmatism, born of fear, was understandable, but Ezekiel met his gaze with an unshakable calm. No. Asterisk, he thought. Our salvation lies not in the fickle hands of kings, but in the steadfast grip of the Almighty. He took a deep breath. "Caleb," he replied, his voice firm, "our only hope, our true deliverance, comes from the Lord, and the Lord alone." His conviction was absolute, a rock in a sea of despair. As Ezekiel and Caleb walked toward the temple, the city's despair was a tangible weight. Women wept openly in the streets. Men argued heatedly about futile strategies, their faces etched with anxiety. "Where is God in all this?" an elderly priest lamented, his voice raspy with doubt. "Has he abandoned us?" The question hung in the air, a common refrain among the terrified populace. Ezekiel's heart ached for their blindness. "No," he responded, his voice gentle yet firm. "God has not abandoned us. We have abandoned him." His words, though quiet, carried the weight of conviction, setting him apart from the desperate murmurs. He knew, deep in his soul, that only divine intervention could save them, and his steps quickened towards the sacred space, seeking that very answer. Inside the temple, the familiar scent of sacrifice and prayer usually brought comfort, but today Ezekiel felt a profound desperation. He fell to his knees near the altar, not in ritual, but in raw, agonizing supplication. "Lord, we have sinned. Your people have strayed." He confessed not just his own failings, but the collective apostasy of Judah, tears streaming down his face. Suddenly, the very foundations of the temple seemed to tremble. A strong, unseen wind swept through the sacred space, carrying with it an indescribable, radiant light that pulsed with an energy beyond comprehension. Ezekiel instinctively shielded his eyes, but the light permeated his very being. Then a voice, deep as the ocean and majestic as thunder, filled the space, vibrating through his bones. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." The sheer, unadulterated holiness was overwhelming. Ezekiel, reduced to nothing, collapsed, crying out, "Woe is me! I am ruined! For I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips." His unworthiness in the face of such glory was a crushing revelation. Still prostrate, Ezekiel felt a searing heat near his lips. A majestic figure, one of the six-winged Elias, descended, a glowing coal clutched in celestial tongs. With a touch that brought both agonizing pain and profound relief, the coal met his lips. Behold, the seraph's voice resonated. "This has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." A wave of cleansing washed over Ezekiel, the terror replaced by an inexplicable peace. Then, the majestic voice of God echoed once more, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" Ezekiel, though still trembling, felt a divine compulsion rise within him, a burning resolve. He pushed himself up, hands raised in surrender, his newly purified lips forming the words, "Here I am, Lord. Send me." He had no idea what lay ahead, only a profound, unwavering obedience. The vision deepened, expanding beyond anything Ezekiel could have imagined. He perceived a majestic throne, dazzling with sapphire and crystal, and upon it, seated in unapproachable light, was the Lord himself. The six-winged Elias, shimmering with celestial fire, flew ceaselessly around the throne, their voices weaving a chorus of awe. "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." The very pillars of the universe seemed to vibrate with their unending praise. Ezekiel, still reeling from his purification, felt the intensity overwhelm him again. His human frame was too fragile, his spirit too small to contain such glory. He trembled uncontrollably, his gaze fixed on the blinding light, and once more a whimper escaped his lips. Unworthy, still unworthy. The weight of God's glory, so immense, so pure, pressed down upon him, reminding him of his utter dependence and fragile humanity. As the celestial grandeur began to recede, a profound sense of peace settled over Ezekiel, yet it was tinged with a heavy foreboding. The voice of God, now softer but no less authoritative, asked again, "Whom shall I send?" And Ezekiel, with newfound conviction forged in the fires of purification and overwhelming glory, responded, "Here am I, Lord. Send me." The Elias, their expression solemn, then imparted the painful truth of his commission. "Go and tell this people, hear indeed, but do not understand. See indeed, but do not perceive." The prophet's heart sank. Rejection. He was being sent to a people who would willfully close their ears and blind their eyes. "Cities will be ruined, desolate," Elias continued, "but do not despair. A remnant, a seed of hope, will remain." Ezekiel swallowed hard, the weight of his mission settling upon him. He was chosen to speak, even if no one would listen. He was chosen to warn, even if his words would be met with scorn. He was chosen, and he would not falter. The vision faded, slowly, gently, leaving the temple in its ordinary, earthly state. Ezekiel slowly pushed himself up, his limbs stiff, his mind reeling. He was no longer the same man who had entered these hallowed halls. Every fiber of his being was altered, imbued with a divine purpose. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, the first rays of dawn kissed his face, a new day dawning for a new prophet. Caleb, who had waited anxiously outside, rushed to him. "Ezekiel, you look different. Your eyes, they glow." Ezekiel met his friend's gaze, his own eyes indeed alight with an otherworldly fire. "I have seen the Lord," he stated simply, his voice imbued with a quiet authority that Caleb had never heard before. "And he has sent me." The bustling streets of Jerusalem, now waking to the morning's rhythm, seemed oblivious to the profound shift that had occurred within Ezekiel. He walked alongside Caleb, the full weight of the commission pressing upon him. "God has revealed to me," Ezekiel began, his voice tinged with sorrow, "that the people of Judah will not listen to my words. They will hear, but they will not understand." Caleb stopped, a look of utter confusion on his face. "Then what is the point, Ezekiel? Why send you if they will not heed?" Ezekiel paused, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, a flicker of hope amidst the despair in his eyes. "There is a greater purpose, Caleb, a purpose beyond their immediate understanding. For even in their rebellion a remnant will be saved. And for them I must speak." His mission, he knew, was not for immediate triumph, but for an enduring truth, a truth that would one day lead to the Anointed One. The marketplace of Jerusalem pulsed with the usual cacophony of commerce and gossip. But today, a new, jarring note was struck. Ezekiel, his face etched with a resolve that belied the tremor in his hands, stepped into the throng. He raised his arms, his voice cutting through the din. "O people of Jerusalem, thus says the Lord, listen closely, but do not understand." He knew the words would sting, for they were God's own, a bitter truth he was commissioned to deliver. And indeed, the crowd's reaction was immediate, visceral. Scorn, sharp and cutting, replaced their murmurs. "A prophet of doom," someone shouted, laughter following like a cruel echo. "Madman," another cried, fingers pointing, mocking. Ezekiel felt the familiar ache in his heart, a deep sorrow for these lost souls. Caleb, ever loyal, saw the rising tide of anger in their eyes and gently but firmly took Ezekiel's arm. "Come, my friend," he urged, pulling him away from the jeering faces, the insults that felt like stones. Ezekiel allowed himself to be led, but his spirit remained defiant, even in the face of such overwhelming disdain. That night, the weight of the day's rejection pressed upon Ezekiel. Alone in his dimly lit home, he knelt, the silence amplifying the turmoil within. "Lord," he whispered, his voice raw with anguish, "how long will I preach and not be heard? How long must I witness their hardened hearts?" A profound weariness settled over him. Then a whisper, not of the wind but of the divine, filled the space around him. Asterisk, "Until the land is devastated, Ezekiel, until chaos covers the cities." A vision, stark and terrifying, unfolded before his inner eye. He saw scorched lands, the earth cracked and barren, homes reduced to dust, the haunting cries of children, the desperate lamentations of mothers. Yet, amidst the desolation, a flicker of something unexpected appeared. A burned stump, seemingly lifeless, from which a tiny, vibrant green shoot began to rise. Even in the depths of destruction, a promise of life, a distant hope, was woven into the fabric of judgment. Ezekiel clung to it, a fragile anchor in the storm of dread. Days bled into weeks, and the grim prophecies Ezekiel had delivered began to unfold with chilling accuracy. News, whispered first, then shouted in panic, filled the streets of Jerusalem. Enemy troops were massing, villages razed, hunger gnawing at the edges of the city. Ezekiel saw the weeping women, heard the desperate pleas for justice, the cries of despair. He clenched his fists, his jaw tight. "They must hear," he muttered, a desperate mantra. The pain of his people was his pain, yet their refusal to heed God's warnings was a deeper wound. Caleb, witnessing the mounting suffering and Ezekiel's unwavering, almost frantic resolve, watched with concern. "Ezekiel," he began, but the prophet turned, his eyes burning with an unshakable conviction. "I will continue, Caleb," he declared, his voice firm, "until my last breath, until every word is spoken, every warning delivered, every hope proclaimed." He knew the path was agonizing, but it was the path God had chosen for him. The summons from King Uzziah came abruptly, a royal decree that brooked no delay. Ezekiel, accompanied by a wary Caleb, found himself once more in the opulent, yet now palpably tense throne room of Jerusalem. King Uzziah, usually composed, paced like a trapped animal, his face pale, his eyes darting nervously towards his worried advisors. The air crackled with fear. News of an impending invasion from the combined forces of Israel and Syria had plunged the palace into a desperate scramble for solutions. Ozias, despite his earlier dismissiveness, was now desperate for any word, any divine intervention that might avert the looming catastrophe. He turned to Ezekiel, his voice tight with barely suppressed panic. "Prophet," he demanded, "what word does your God have for us now?" Ezekiel met the king's frantic gaze with a quiet resolve. "Do not fear, King Ozias," he began, his voice calm amidst the palace's rising panic. "Thus says the Lord, you will not be overcome." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the advisors, but then Ezekiel continued, his voice resonating with an astonishing new revelation. "For God himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." Silence descended, thick and disbelieving. Ozias's jaw dropped, his relief turning to incredulity. His advisors exchanged, bewildered, then mocking, glances. A virgin? How utterly preposterous! Caleb, standing a respectful distance away, felt a jolt of confusion himself. He looked at Ezekiel, a silent question in his eyes. But Ezekiel stood firm, his conviction unshakable. He knew the words were a stumbling block, a paradox, yet they were the Lord's own, a promise of God with us, in the most impossible way imaginable. The news of the virgin prophecy spread through Jerusalem like wildfire, but it kindled not faith, but widespread mockery. How quickly the people forgot the fear that had driven their king to seek divine counsel. On the bustling streets, people openly called Ezekiel mad, a delusional old man. Young men with nothing to lose and a taste for sport taunted him, mimicking his gestures, shouting, "A virgin! Ha! Is your God truly so desperate for a sign?" Ezekiel, though his heart ached, met their derision with an unearthly calm. His voice, though quiet, carried an undeniable weight. "Laugh today," he replied, his gaze sweeping over their sneering faces. "Mock now, for your eyes see only the present. But the words of the Lord do not fail. They will stand, long after your laughter fades." He walked on, leaving behind a bewildered silence, his inner peace a stark contrast to their fleeting scorn. The audacity of the Emmanuel prophecy haunted Ezekiel. How could a virgin conceive? His mind, steeped in the laws of nature, wrestled with the divine decree. One quiet, dimly lit evening, he knelt in his home, pouring out his heart in prayer. "Lord," he pleaded, "why do you show me things my mind cannot grasp, truths that defy all earthly understanding?" He yearned for clarity, for a glimpse of how such a miracle could unfold. As he prayed, a profound peace settled over him, and a brief, ethereal vision appeared. He saw a young woman, bathed in a soft, ethereal light, her form growing, her face serene. Then, in her arms, a child, wrapped in swaddling clothes, radiating an undeniable holiness. The image was fleeting, yet deeply imprinted on his soul. He whispered the name, Emmanuel, as tears, not of sorrow, but of awe and profound, tender understanding, streamed down his face. God had granted him a glimpse, a sacred, personal assurance that this impossible thing would indeed come to pass. Armed with this renewed, intimate conviction, Ezekiel returned to the central square of Jerusalem, where fear for the city's fate was now palpable. He proclaimed the sign of Emmanuel, God with us, his voice ringing with a conviction that defied the rising tension. Yet the people, hardened by suffering and skeptical of miraculous promises, only mocked him further. "A dreaming prophet," they scoffed. "Where is this God with us now, Ezekiel, when our enemies surround us? What kind of God allows such suffering?" Their bitter questions pierced Ezekiel's heart, but he stood firm. Caleb, ever his shadow, whispered a warning. "You are only stirring hatred, Ezekiel. They want a warrior, not a miraculous child." But Ezekiel merely shook his head. He knew the truth was not for the faint of heart, nor for those who demanded God conform to their expectations. His message of hope, though rejected, was the only true answer to their despair, and he would not be deterred. In the quiet sanctuary of his home, by the flickering light of a single lamp, Ezekiel found solace and strength. He gathered his wife and children, their faces soft in the warm glow, and shared the profound, impossible truth of the Emmanuel Prophecy. His voice was tender, yet imbued with unwavering conviction. "The people ridicule me," he confessed. "They call me mad, but I have seen, and I know in my soul that this Emmanuel, this God with us, will be born." His children, wide-eyed, listened to his every word. His wife, a pillar of quiet strength, reached out and gently took his hand. Her eyes met his, full of understanding and belief. "If God has shown you this, my husband," she affirmed softly, "then it will be so." In their loving embrace, in their simple, steadfast faith, Ezekiel found a respite from the scorn of the world, a deep well of comfort that nourished his weary spirit. The temple, usually a place of refuge, became another arena of confrontation for Ezekiel. As he walked through a quiet corridor, a group of stern-faced Sanhedrin members emerged, blocking his path. Their expressions were severe, their authority palpable. "Ezekiel," one of them began, his voice laced with indignation, "you must cease spreading this false hope, this confusion among the people. Your talk of a virgin and a miraculous child undermines the very foundations of our faith." Another chimed in, "We need strength, not impossible tales." Ezekiel met their gaze, his weariness warring with an unyielding determination. "My words," he stated, his voice clear and resonant, "are not my own. They are from the Lord of hosts, and I will proclaim his hope, whether you choose to listen or not." He would not be silenced. The path ahead, he knew, would only grow steeper, yet his resolve remained unbroken. After the relentless weight of Jerusalem's despair, a fragile peace settled over Ezekiel's spirit one night. He dreamed, not of fire or judgment, but of a small boy, perhaps no older than 5, running freely among ancient olive trees. The sunlight dappled through the leaves, illuminating his joyful, innocent face. A profound serenity emanated from the child, a palpable sense of peace that washed over Ezekiel even in his slumber. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of his waking world. He awoke with a start, the image vivid, the feeling lingering. A single word escaped his lips, a whisper into the pre-dawn quiet, "Emmanuel, God with us." But what did this vision mean? Was there a deeper, hidden meaning to this Prince of Peace, one beyond what he had already been shown? Ezekiel sensed a new layer of mystery unfurling, a gentle promise veiled in the simplicity of a child's dream. The answer came not long after, on a crisp, early morning, as Ezekiel sought solace and clarity on a hill overlooking Jerusalem. The city lay hushed below, still holding its breath against the coming day. As he knelt in prayer, a familiar warmth enveloped him, a presence both ancient and new. Then the air shimmered, and before his eyes, an extraordinary vision materialized. It was the child from his dream, but now imbued with a special, ethereal glow, radiating an impossible light. And then the heavenly voice, deep and resonant, filled the silence, echoing not just in his ears, but in the very core of his being. "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." Ezekiel gasped, startled, his mind reeling. Mighty God? Everlasting Father? How could a child, a mere human, bear such grand divine titles? He struggled to grasp the profound implications, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe, confusion, and an overwhelming surge of hope. This was not just a king. This was something far, far greater. Compelled by the power of the vision, Ezekiel rushed down to the bustling marketplace, his heart alight with this new, astonishing revelation. He raised his voice, proclaiming the divine titles of the promised child: Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, who would bring justice and everlasting peace. He spoke with an urgency that vibrated with hope, a desperate plea for his people to listen. But the faces in the crowd remained etched with skepticism, their eyes weary, their ears deafened by their own suffering. "Another child," one man scoffed, his voice laced with bitterness. "When, Ezekiel? When will this child come? We need a king with an army now, not another dream." Others joined in, asking similar questions, their patience worn thin by years of unfulfilled promises and escalating threats. Caleb, ever the practical one, pulled at Ezekiel's robe. "Master," he whispered, "you only stir further division. They want a sword, not a lullaby." Ezekiel knew his friend spoke truth, and a familiar ache settled in his soul. How could he make them understand a hope that seemed so distant, so impossible, yet was so profoundly real? That night, sleep was a distant luxury for Ezekiel. He lay on his small bed, staring at the ceiling, the majestic titles from the vision echoing in the silent chamber. Mighty God, Everlasting Father. His mind wrestled with the paradox. A child, yet God. A son, yet the Everlasting Father. It defied all logic, all understanding of the divine and the human. He rose to his knees, his voice a raw whisper in the darkness. "Lord," he prayed, "how can a simple child bear such grand titles? Who will this son truly be? My mind cannot reconcile these truths. My people will never understand. How can I explain what I myself cannot fully grasp?" The yearning for understanding was a physical ache, a spiritual wrestling match within his very soul. He longed for clarity, not just for himself, but for the hardened hearts of Judah. The Sanhedrin, guardians of tradition and protectors of the status quo, wasted no time in confronting Ezekiel. They cornered him in a quiet, austere temple corridor, their faces stern, their voices sharp with indignation. "Ezekiel, you must cease speaking about these children," one elder demanded, his finger jabbing the air. "First a virgin, now a child with the titles of God. What madness is this? What kind of God promises salvation through a child, while our enemies gather at our gates?" Their mocking words cut deep, striking at the very core of the divine mystery Ezekiel was entrusted to proclaim. They preferred the strength of an earthly army, the wisdom of political alliances, not the seemingly weak promise of a child. Ezekiel met their gaze, his resolve unyielding despite the weariness in his bones. "God's answer," he replied, his voice firm, "will come in a way you do not expect. His power is not found in the swords you wield, but in the truth you reject." His words, though cryptic, were a quiet defiance. Back in the solitude of his home, during prayer, a soft, warm light filled the room, chasing away the shadows of the Sanhedrin's scorn. Ezekiel closed his eyes, seeking guidance, and another vision unfolded before him, grander in scope than any before. He saw not just the people of Judah, but vast crowds from many nations, Gentiles speaking different tongues, their faces illuminated by a radiant, distant light. They were walking, slowly but surely, towards that light, drawn by an unseen force. A profound realization washed over him. He whispered the words that would resonate through the ages. "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. This Emmanuel, this Prince of Peace, was not just for Israel. No, his salvation was a light to the Gentiles, a beacon of hope for all the world, for every tribe and tongue." It was a revolutionary concept, one that shattered the insular worldview of his people and expanded the very definition of God's chosen. When Ezekiel next proclaimed his vision of light to the Gentiles in the central square, a different kind of reaction erupted. Many simply ignored him or laughed at the absurdity of a God concerned with distant pagan nations. But others, enraged by the implications of a shared salvation, felt their traditions threatened. Their anger quickly boiled over. A stone, sharp and heavy, whizzed past Ezekiel's ear, landing with a painful thud at his feet. "Blasphemer!" someone shrieked. "Judah alone is chosen! You speak lies!" Soon, other stones followed, thrown by agitated hands. Ezekiel dodged, his heart pounding, the air thick with hostility. Caleb, reacting quickly, grabbed his arm. "Ezekiel, we must go," he urged, pulling him through the surging crowd. They fled through narrow, winding alleys, the shouts and the thud of stones echoing behind them, a chilling testament to the depth of his people's rejection. Safe within the four walls of his home, the adrenaline faded, replaced by an overwhelming wave of anguish. Ezekiel fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Lord," he cried, his voice raw, "how will all this happen? How can they be saved if they will not listen?" His heart ached, not for himself, but for the very people who had just tried to stone him. Later, as he walked with Caleb through the quieter, darkened alleys, Ezekiel expressed the depth of his pain. "Caleb," he murmured, his voice heavy with sorrow, "I love these people, my own kin, my own blood. But their hearts are hardened, their ears deaf. They refuse to see the hand of God, even as judgment approaches." He felt a profound helplessness, a crushing burden that threatened to suffocate him. How could he, a single man, turn the tide of an entire nation's stubborn disobedience? The impending doom felt tangible, a weight he was powerless to stop. The prophecy shifted, growing darker still. With a pale, solemn face, Ezekiel stood at the temple entrance, then walked through the somber streets, proclaiming God's judgment once more. "Woe to Assyria," he declared, his voice resonating with divine authority. "Your arrogance will be brought low, your pride shattered." Then, turning to his own people, he spoke of Judah's impending desolation, a consequence of their unrepentant hearts. The citizens, however, were beyond listening. They mocked him openly, their contempt a bitter sting. "There he goes again," a woman muttered, shaking her head. "He has finally lost his mind, always speaking condemnation, never hope." Another scoffed, "He offers only gloom and despair." Caleb, ever by his side, gently touched Ezekiel's arm, a silent warning to temper his words. But Ezekiel, resolute in his obedience, continued, prophesying devastation. He knew these words were not his own, and he would not, could not, remain silent, even as his people scorned him as a madman. The weight of judgment bore down on Ezekiel, pressing him to the floor of his home in prayer. "Lord," he cried out, his voice choked with emotion, "how long must I proclaim judgment? My heart breaks for them." As he pleaded, a new vision, grim and visceral, consumed him. He saw scorched land stretching to the horizon, homes reduced to dust, the stones of Jerusalem scattered like pebbles. The air was filled with the heart-wrenching sound of crying children, their innocent faces streaked with grime and tears. He saw mourning mothers, their arms empty, their wails echoing through the desolate landscape. The stench of ash and despair filled his spiritual senses. He murmured, his voice barely audible through his weeping, "This is the price of disobedience." The vision solidified the grim reality of what was to come, deepening Ezekiel's personal suffering over the fate of his beloved, rebellious people. The dusty fields outside Jerusalem stretched under a sky heavy with unspoken dread. Ezekiel, his face etched with the prophet's sorrow, stood before a small gathering of farmers, their faces hardened by sun and worry. He spoke with urgent, pained conviction, warning them that their precious fields would be seized, their harvests destroyed, their very sustenance torn from their grasp. But the words, instead of stirring repentance, ignited anger. "Silence, prophet!" a burly farmer roared, his voice thick with frustration, his hands clenched into fists. "Our problems are political, not spiritual. Our fields need rain, not your endless pronouncements of doom." Others murmured in agreement, their eyes glinting with hostility. Caleb, ever watchful, saw the dangerous spark in their eyes. He quickly took Ezekiel's arm, his grip firm, pulling him away from the volatile crowd. There was no reasoning with men whose fear had curdled into a bitter, defiant pride. Ezekiel's heart ached, a deep, profound distress settling within him as they retreated, leaving behind the rising tide of their wrath. That night, on a desolate hill near Jerusalem, the cold morning air bit at Ezekiel's skin, mirroring the chill in his soul. He knelt, desperate, praying for an end to the relentless visions of destruction, for a glimmer of hope to pierce the encroaching darkness. And then it came. Not fire, not famine, but a new vision, profoundly different, yet equally astonishing. Before his inner eye, a humble man emerged, his face marked not by age, but by an unspoken sorrow. His shoulders were bent, as if carrying an invisible burden, yet there was an inherent strength in his posture, a quiet dignity. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the silence of Ezekiel's mind. "Here is my servant whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations." Ezekiel, utterly bewildered by this unexpected image, could only murmur, "Who is this, Lord? Who is this man?" The weight of mystery descended, heavy and profound, hinting at a path to redemption unlike any he had ever conceived. Later, as they walked a quiet stretch of Jerusalem's bustling streets, Ezekiel tried to articulate the bewildering vision to Caleb. His voice was hushed, filled with a mix of wonder and confusion. He was special, Caleb. Humble, yes, but with a presence that spoke of power, of a divine calling. The Lord said he would bring justice, but not with a sword, not with a shout. He simply carried something, a suffering, perhaps, that wasn't his own. Ezekiel's hands moved expressively, trying to capture the elusive image. Caleb listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought, the sounds of the city fading around them. A man like that, divine yet humble, carrying suffering? Is he among us now, Ezekiel? Is he already here, walking these very streets? Caleb asked, his voice laced with genuine puzzlement. Ezekiel shook his head slowly, his gaze distant. "I do not know, my friend. I only know that the Lord has revealed him, and his purpose is unlike anything we have ever imagined." The mystery of the suffering servant had only just begun to unfold. Back in the quiet sanctity of his home, Ezekiel sat at his writing table, the parchment glowing softly in the lamplight. The ink flowed, driven by a divine urgency, as he began to record the words echoing in his soul. "The Lord called me from the womb," he wrote, the words a testament to the servant's preordained destiny. Then a profound realization struck him, and he continued, "I have made you a light to the Gentiles, that you may bring my salvation to the ends of the earth." The global scope of this anointed one's mission settled upon him with breathtaking clarity. Yet, the world outside remained deaf. In the marketplace, later that day, as he carried his scrolls, a young man, lounging idly, pointed and scoffed. First, a virgin, then a mighty God. And now you're talking about a mysterious servant. Who's next, Ezekiel? A king who cleans latrines? The taunt pierced Ezekiel, but he remained silent, his gaze conflicted. How could he bridge this chasm of disbelief? The burden of the next revelation was almost too heavy to bear. Standing on a busy street corner in Jerusalem, amidst merchants hawking their wares and passers-by rushing through their day, Ezekiel proclaimed the next astonishing truth. This servant, he declared, his voice somber, will be a man of sorrows, acquainted with the deepest suffering, despised and rejected by men. He spoke of a figure who would endure unimaginable humiliation, offering his back to those who strike him, enduring insults and spit with quiet dignity. The crowd, however, wanted none of it. They craved messages of victory, of a triumphant king, not a suffering victim. Murmurs rippled through them. "There he goes again," a woman muttered, turning her back. "Always condemnation, always pain. We need a warrior, not a prophet of sorrow." Ezekiel watched them go, their indifference, a fresh wound in his already heavy heart. The murmurs soon turned to outright hostility. As Ezekiel continued to speak of the suffering servant, a sharp crack split the air. A stone, thrown with malicious intent, landed with a thud near his feet. "Enough, Ezekiel!" a man bellowed, his face contorted in rage. "I'm done with your words of doom. We need a liberator, a warrior, a king to save us from our enemies, not a prophet of sorrow and weakness." Other voices joined the chorus, demanding a Messiah who would fight, not suffer. They saw only shame in his words, not salvation. Ezekiel, though he dodged the next stone, felt the weight of their hatred press down on him. Despite the crowd, he was utterly alone, the profound solitude of his calling enveloping him. His eyes, filled with sorrow, met Caleb's, who stood ready to shield him, to pull him once more from the brink of their fury. The rejection intensified, moving from the public square to the quiet, tense confines of Ezekiel's own home. His cousin, Lysander, a man whose face usually held a friendly smile, now stood before him, his features strained with desperation. "Ezekiel, please," Lysander pleaded, his voice cracking. "You must stop this. Our family business is suffering. Our relatives are ashamed to be associated with you. They call you mad, a bringer of ill fortune." He wrung his hands, his eyes darting to Caleb, who stood by silently. "You are ruining us all. I can no longer claim you as kin." The words, sharp and final, were a brutal blow. Ezekiel flinched, a deep, personal hurt twisting in his gut. Yet, even through the pain, his resolve remained unshaken. "God chose me, Lysander. I cannot stay silent. I must speak his truth, no matter the cost." Lysander, with a heartbroken sigh, turned and walked away, disowning his cousin and severing a bond that had once been strong. Alone, the anguish became unbearable. Ezekiel withdrew to the solemn silence of the temple, falling to his knees before the altar, his voice a raw cry in the stillness. "Lord, how long will I be mocked? How long will I suffer this rejection?" He pleaded for understanding, for strength, for an end to the overwhelming burden. Instead, a new vision unfolded, more visceral, more terrifying than any before. He saw the servant, the humble man, shoved and beaten, enduring it all silently. Then the horror escalated. The servant was scourged, his back bared, the whip tearing at his flesh. With every lash, blood bloomed, crimson against pale skin, ripping and shredding. Ezekiel cried out, a guttural sound of agony, clutching his chest as if the blows were his own. "No, this is too much. I can't bear it, Lord. I cannot bear to witness this." The suffering was real, immediate, and utterly devastating. Yet, the vision continued, the brutal scourging unrelenting. As Ezekiel choked back his cries, a divine voice, filled with both sorrow and profound purpose, narrated the horrific scene. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. The voice resonated, each word a hammer blow to Ezekiel's soul. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds we are healed. The revelation struck Ezekiel with the force of a physical blow. It was not for the servant's own sins. It was for theirs. For his sins. For the sins of all humanity. The suffocating weight of this truth, the immensity of the substitutionary sacrifice, overwhelmed him. He collapsed to the cold temple floor, gasping for breath, tears streaming down his face as the full crushing burden of humanity's guilt and the servant's profound love settled upon him. The agonizing visions continued to unravel, each detail a profound and unsettling truth. Back in his writing room, Ezekiel, still trembling from the previous revelation, forced his hand to transcribe the next impossible prophecy. He wrote of the servant being pierced for our transgressions, and as his quill moved, a new vision consumed him. He saw the servant, not just beaten, but bound to wood, his hands and feet pierced by crude, brutal nails. An execution, cruel and unprecedented, unfolded before him. People below laughed and mocked, their faces twisted in derision, as the servant hung there, slowly dying. "What is this, Lord?" Ezekiel whispered, his voice hoarse with horror. "What manner of death is this? How can a man endure such a thing, and for whom?" The image of the pierced hands and feet burned into his mind, a terrifying prophetic foreshadowing of the Anointed One's ultimate sacrifice. The vision continued, pushing Ezekiel to the very brink of his endurance. The servant hung lifeless, a silent testament to injustice, enduring the final mockery of the crowd like a lamb led to the slaughter, without a single complaint. His body, broken yet dignified, was gently taken down from the cruel wood and carried away to a new, silent tomb. Ezekiel watched, his heart shattered, tears streaming down his face. "Why, Lord?" he cried, his voice barely a whisper. "Why does this man endure all of this without complaint? Why this silence in the face of such torment and death?" The silence of the tomb, the quiet dignity of the lifeless servant, spoke volumes of a sacrifice so profound, so willing, that it defied all human understanding. Staggering from his vision, Ezekiel, in an agony of revelation, stumbled into his writing room, where Caleb found him, distraught. "Caleb," he cried, his voice raw, his face streaked with tears and exhaustion. "I saw him. Every detail, the beating, the scourging, the piercing, the death." He grabbed Caleb by the shoulders, his eyes wild with the profound, terrible truth. "It wasn't for his sins, Caleb. It was for ours. All the guilt, all the pain, all the transgressions of humanity, it was laid upon him." Caleb's face was a mask of shock, disbelief warring with the terror in Ezekiel's eyes. "For," he whispered, his own mind reeling. But Ezekiel, despite his anguish, was resolute. He pushed Caleb gently away, seizing his quill, knowing these words, however horrific, however unbelievable, must be recorded. They had to endure, a testament to a love and sacrifice beyond human comprehension. You've witnessed Ezekiel's journey through judgment, despair, and the agonizing revelation of the suffering servant. You've felt his pain as he documented the Anointed One's humiliation and brutal death. He had just inscribed the final sorrowful words, the ink still wet, when the very air in his writing room began to shimmer. An intense, blinding light, not from the sun but from somewhere beyond, invaded his vision. It was a light that pushed back the shadows of death he had just described, a light that defied all logic, all human experience. And there, within that impossible radiance, stood the same servant, but he was not lifeless, he was alive. The scars of scourging and piercing were still visible, etched upon his hands and feet, a testament to the agony he had endured. Yet his countenance was serene, full of an unearthly life that radiated peace. A divine whisper, soft as a breeze but resonating deep within Ezekiel's soul, echoed through the light. After the anguish of his soul, he will see the light and be satisfied. Ezekiel's breath hitched in his throat. His mind, so accustomed to the grim realities of death, struggled to comprehend. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This can't be. This is impossible." Yet the vision persisted, a glorious, undeniable truth. Death had been swallowed up in victory. The vision faded, but its imprint burned behind Ezekiel's eyes. He stumbled from his writing table, pacing the small room, his mind reeling. "No one returns from death," he muttered, the ancient truth a desperate anchor in a sea of overwhelming wonder. Just then, Caleb, his face etched with worry, rushed in, reporting some new public disturbance. But Ezekiel barely heard him. His own news was far more profound. With tears now streaming down his face, tears of awe, not sorrow, he turned to his friend. "Caleb," he choked out, "I have seen life after death." Caleb's eyes widened, a mixture of disbelief and fear dawning in them. Ezekiel grabbed his quill, a renewed urgency possessing him, and with trembling hands he began to write, his words flowing with divine certainty. He will prolong his days. Caleb watched, speechless, as Ezekiel scribbled these miraculous words. "He won't just live again," Ezekiel affirmed, his voice gaining strength. "He will see the reward for his suffering. His days will be prolonged, far beyond the grave." It was a truth that shattered the foundations of their world, a truth that demanded unwavering faith. For you see, dear reader, Ezekiel was not merely documenting a death, but prophesying an eternal triumph. The revelation of resurrection was a shock, a sudden, blinding sunrise after a night of profound darkness. Yet Ezekiel felt there was more to understand. He woke from a restless sleep, the weight of all the suffering he had witnessed still heavy on his soul, and knelt by the edge of his bed, praying for a vision of pure, unadulterated hope. And God answered. A new vision unfolded, tranquil and vibrant. He saw not scorched lands, but fields blooming with impossible color, children laughing as they chased each other through golden wheat. Jerusalem, once crumbling, now stood rebuilt, its streets echoing with joyous laughter, its walls radiating peace. A gentle, comforting voice, like a melody, permeated the vision. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, to bring good news to the brokenhearted. Ezekiel felt a profound peace wash over him, a balm to his weary spirit. He whispered a single word, a word that encapsulated everything he saw and felt: hope. The Anointed One's journey, it seemed, was not just about suffering and victory over death, but about a complete, glorious restoration. This vision, a stark contrast to the devastation he had so often witnessed, offered a glimpse into a future far brighter than anyone could imagine. Compelled by this radiant vision, Ezekiel rushed to the temple, his heart swelling with a message of unparalleled joy. A small, weary crowd had gathered, their faces still etched with the fear of impending doom. He proclaimed a time of restoration, a season of comfort for those who weep. The people looked at him, astonishment slowly replacing their despair. "Is there," one woman dared to ask, her voice trembling, "still hope?" Ezekiel, his face radiant with conviction, nodded. "After the darkest night, the sun rises again," he declared, his voice echoing through the temple arches. He returned home and immediately recorded this glorious new prophecy, capturing the essence of the vision. A crown instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning. It was a promise that transcended their immediate suffering, a divine pledge of future healing and boundless joy. He was delivering not just a message, but a complete transformation of their destiny. Even with the profound hope of restoration, a persistent ache remained in Ezekiel's soul. He had seen pieces: the virgin birth, the divine titles, the suffering, the death, the resurrection, and now the glorious restoration. But he felt a final piece of the puzzle was missing, something that would tie it all together into an undeniable, cohesive whole. Kneeling on the cool stone floor of his home, utterly exhausted but yearning for completion, he prayed, "Lord, you have shown me so much, yet I feel there is more, much more. Something that ties it all together." He finally drifted into a deep sleep, and in his dreams, a new light rose, not blinding, but warm and all-encompassing, hinting at something grand and glorious. It was the whisper of a final truth, waiting to be unveiled. The dawn broke, painting Ezekiel's room in hues of gold, but the light within him was far brighter. He awoke with a profound peace and an unshakable urgency. All his past visions, once fragmented and bewildering, now converged in his mind with crystalline clarity. He whispered, tears of awe in his eyes, "My God!" Everything points to him. One single man, one single Savior. Just then, Caleb, perhaps sensing the shift in the very air, rushed in. Ezekiel, barely able to contain his excitement, grabbed his friend's arm. "Caleb!" All the visions, the Virgin, Emmanuel, the wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, the suffering servant, pierced for our transgressions, the one who rises from the dead, who brings restoration and joy, it all points to the Messiah. They are all Him, one and the same. It was the intellectual and spiritual climax of his entire prophetic journey, a moment of breathtaking revelation that unified every seemingly disparate prophecy into a single glorious truth. He had found the map, and it led to one destination. With this grand unification, Ezekiel knew his mission was clear: to document this ultimate truth for generations to come. He sat at his writing table, his quill moving with a newfound certainty, his voice firm as he recited from his scroll. He shall see the fruit of the travail of his soul and be satisfied. He looked up at Caleb, his eyes shining with triumph. I am writing the gospel itself, he declared, even before it happens. Ezekiel paused, then continued, his voice ringing with conviction. Nations and kings will witness this fulfillment, for his word never fails. He knew with an unshakable certainty that these words, once met with scorn and disbelief, would one day be hailed as the very bedrock of hope. The map was complete, and its destination was the Anointed One. And so we close the book on Ezekiel, the prophet who, against all odds, pieced together the most intricate and profound prophetic map to the Anointed One. His courage, his unwavering obedience in the face of relentless rejection, reminds us that God's truth often defies human logic and popular opinion. Ezekiel's prophecies, once whispers in a desolate land, became the very framework for understanding the Messiah. From a virgin's womb to a suffering servant, from a pierced body to a triumphant resurrection, and finally to a glorious restoration, Ezekiel saw it all. Some of these prophecies, as you know, have already been fulfilled with astonishing precision. Others, the grand restoration, still await their appointed time. What will you do with this prophetic map? Will you, like Ezekiel, live with faith and courage, believing God's promises, even when the world mocks? Will you seek to understand this Anointed One, this Emmanuel, this suffering servant, this Prince of Peace, who is the very heart of all prophecy? The story of Ezekiel is not just history, it is a timeless call to faith.